December 1980, Cold War Europe, NATO tensions rising. Deep inside Rendlesham Forest, American military personnel report strange lights moving through the trees beside a strategic airbase linked to nuclear operations. Thousands of kilometers away, other governments are confronting their own unexplained encounters. Brazil, France, Japan, Russia, the United States, different nations, different political systems, different military cultures, yet the same pattern appears again and again. Pilots report anomalous objects. Radar operators track unusual returns. Witnesses describe events they struggle to explain, and governments respond with a familiar mix of caution, secrecy, uncertainty, and controlled disclosure. Because UFO phenomena are not uniquely American, they are global, and perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the mystery is not simply what people are seeing, but how institutions around the world react when confronted with the unknown. Tonight, we investigate the most significant international UAP encounters, how governments responded, the rise of global disclosure systems, military secrecy, institutional ambiguity, Cold War intelligence fears, public transparency programs, and the remarkable similarities appearing across completely different nations. Because while governments may disagree politically, their reactions to unexplained aerial phenomenon often look strikingly alike. This is UFO to UAP, the Disclosure Report. I'm your host, Matt Tones, and tonight we go global. To understand global UFO phenomenon, we begin with the United States, because America shaped much of the modern UFO narrative. Roswell, 1947, a ranch outside Roswell, New Mexico. Initial military statements referenced the recovery of a flying disc. Then suddenly, the narrative changed. The object became a weather balloon. That reversal ignited decades of suspicion. But Roswell's true historical significance may not lie in whether the extraterrestrials crashed in New Mexico. Its importance may instead lie in institutional response, conflicting statements, military secrecy, narrative control, and public distrust. Those patterns would repeat globally for decades, and as the Cold War intensified, the United States increasingly viewed unidentified area phenomena through a national security lens, not necessarily as alien visitation, but as potential Soviet technology, aerospace threats, surveillance platforms, or intelligence uncertainties. That framework still dominates modern UAP policy today. Programs evolved: Project Blue Book, AATIP, the UAP Task Force, AOIMSG, and eventually AARO. The language modernized, the systems evolved, but one thing remained constant. The government repeatedly acknowledged there were aerial incidents it could not immediately explain. Now, we move across the Atlantic. December 1980, Rendlesham Forest. And we just done an episode on this one. Perhaps the most famous military UFO case in British history. American servicemen stationed at RAF Bentwaters reported strange lights descending into the forest near strategically sensitive military facilities. Witnesses described unusual aerial movement, a triangular craft, and unexplained lights maneuvering through the trees. Then came one of the most important aspects of the case: the Halt memo, an official military memorandum written by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt documenting unexplained observations during the incident. This matters enormously because Rendlesham produced military witnesses, recorded audio, official documentation, and decades of ongoing controversy. But perhaps even more interesting than the sighting itself was the institutional response. British authorities never fully endorsed extraordinary explanations, but neither did the mystery disappear completely. Instead, Rendlesham entered a strange bureaucratic grey zone: acknowledged, documented, but unresolved. That pattern should sound familiar by now, because modern governments often respond to UAP incidents through managed ambiguity. Not full confirmation, not total dismissal, but controlled uncertainty. Now we arrive at one of the most important international examples, France, because unlike many governments, France openly institutionalized UFO investigation through an official public-facing organization, GEIPAN, spelled GEIPAN. GEIPAN is a branch associated with the French space agency CNES. Its mission? Collect and analyze reports of unidentified aerospace phenomena. This is hugely significant historically because France approached the issue differently. Rather than burying discussion entirely behind military secrecy, France created a partially transparent investigative framework. Public reports became accessible, cases were categorized, data was archived, and importantly, the French model acknowledged something most governments quietly understood. Unexplained reports continue occurring regardless of public stigma. Now, this does not mean France confirmed extraterrestrials, far from it. Most cases still received conventional explanations, but Gaipan demonstrated something remarkable: a government policy admitting systematic investigation of aerial anomalies deserved institutional legitimacy. That was decades ahead of much of the modern disclosure conversation. Now, we move east into the Soviet Union because UFO reports were not exclusive to Western democracies. During the Cold War, Soviet military personnel also reported unexplained aerial phenomenon, and the Soviet response reflected its own political culture: extreme secrecy, strategic compartmentalization, military control of information. This is critical because both the United States and Soviet Union encountered unexplained aerial reports during periods of intense geopolitical tension, and both initially interpreted anomalies through the same lens: national security threat assessment. Could these objects represent enemy surveillance systems, classified aerospace technology, intelligence operations, psychological warfare? Again, the concern was not initially extraterrestrial, it was strategic uncertainty. And uncertainty inside Cold War military systems created enormous anxiety, especially near nuclear installations, missile facilities, and strategic defense infrastructure. Increasingly, both superpowers appeared to encounter similar institutional problems: fragmented reporting, witness stigma, inconsistent analysis, and secrecy barriers limiting public understanding. Different governments, same uncertainty. Now, we travel to South America, Brazil, 1996. The Varginha incident, one of the most controversial UFO related events in Latin American history. Witnesses claim strange creatures were observed after reports of unusual aerial activity. Military involvement followed quickly, and almost immediately, conflicting narratives emerge. Supporters of the case argued witnesses encountered something extraordinary. Skeptics countered misidentification and folklore amplified ordinary events into mythology. But once again, the institutional response became just as important as the alleged encounter itself: confusion, secrecy allegations, public distrust, conflicting official explanations. These patterns now repeat so consistently across countries that they become difficult to ignore, because regardless of whether the underlying phenomenon is extraordinary, governments repeatedly struggle to manage public uncertainty once anomalous events enter public consciousness. Now, we move to Asia, 1986. Japan Airlines 1628, a cargo flight traveling over Alaska. Captain Kenju Terauchi reported observing enormous unidentified objects pacing the aircraft. Crucially, radar data reportedly supported portions of the encounter. This case became globally significant because it involved commercial aviation, experienced pilots, radar tracking, and international aviation authorities. But once again, the response remained cautious. No definitive explanation emerged, and the institutional reaction reflected another recurring global pattern: bureaucratic containment, not necessarily suppression, but stabilization. Governments and aviation agencies tend to avoid premature, extraordinary conclusions, especially when public confidence in aerospace safety is involved. That caution is understandable, but it also fuels suspicion. And that tension lies at the center of nearly every major international UFO case. Now, we reach deeper into the questions. Why do governments investigate UFOs at all? The public often assumes governments investigate because they suspect extraterrestrials, but historically, the primary concern is usually much simpler: national security. Unknown objects in controlled airspace create operational problems. Military systems depend on identification: known, unknown, friendly, hostile. Once identified objects repeatedly appear near military assets, nuclear facilities, naval groups, or civilian aviation corridors, investigation becomes unavoidable. This is why countries with vastly different political systems often respond similarly, because aerospace uncertainty transcends ideology. One of the biggest challenges in global UAP analysis is data inconsistency. Different countries use different radar systems, different reporting structures, different classification rules, different intelligence frameworks, and different investigative methodologies. This creates enormous fragmentation. Some governments release documents publicly, others classify aggressively. Some encourage reporting, others discourage it culturally. And even when multiple witnesses exist, sensor limitations complicate interpretation. Radar ambiguity happens, optical distortions happen, incomplete data sets happen, perspective errors happen. That does not automatically invalidate reports, but it explains why definitive conclusions remain difficult. The public often expects certainty, but intelligence environments rarely provide it. Now, the global landscape is changing. Public stigma around UAP reporting is weakening. Governments are becoming more open, discussing aerial anomalies. Military pilots increasingly report encounters formally. Congressional hearings occur publicly. And international cooperation around aerospace monitoring continues expanding. This is not full disclosure, but it is normalization. And perhaps that is the most important shift of all. The unknown is slowly moving from ridicule into institutional analysis. That transition is historic. Ultimately, global UFO phenomena force humanity to confront something uncomfortable. Not necessarily are aliens visiting Earth, but perhaps something more profound. What happens when modern institutions repeatedly encounter events they cannot immediately explain? Governments are built around certainty. Military systems are built around control. Intelligence systems are built around categorization. Yet across decades, multiple nations continue confronting anomalies that resist simple explanation. That may be the true global pattern, not proof, but persistent uncertainty. And perhaps that uncertainty itself explains why governments respond so cautiously. Different countries, different cultures, different political systems, and yet the same patterns appear again and again. Witnesses report anomalies, military systems investigate quietly, governments release limited information. Public curiosity grows and uncertainty persists. Perhaps the greatest revelation of global UFO phenomena is not what appears in the sky, but how remarkably similar institutional behavior becomes when confronted with the unknown. Because whether in Washington, Moscow, London, Paris, Tokyo, Sydney, or Brasilia, governments consistently struggle with the same dilemma. How do you manage public uncertainty of phenomena you may not fully understand yourself? That question remains unresolved, and perhaps that unresolved tension is the real heart of the global UAP mystery. This has been UFO to UAP, the Disclosure Report. I'm your host, Matt Tones. Thank you for listening. Remember to click subscribe on the Spotify homepage and share the podcast and get others into the conversation. I'd love to hear your thoughts via the comments. Talk soon.